Okay. All right, are we about ready to start?
Yes, sir.
Okay, well, let's get started. I know everybody has a busy schedule. I want to thank everyone for coming out and the panelists to take this time out of their busy schedule to be here today. And Gaines Street Church of Christ, and put it on this great conference. We think that there's some information that we can impart to those who are signed in. We hope we have a diverse population of young as well as old, and that we can all get this information out and it benefits you in some kind of way. We have these panelists, and we'll come back to them and allow them each to introduce themselves. But first, let's say a word of prayer. Father, we acknowledge you as creator of all,
yes,
the master of all knowledge. Thank you for giving us the knowledge to impart to those in need. We thank you for all that you've done in carrying us through this year, and ask you to continue to bless and keep us as we go forward. We ask you to be in the midst of this meeting and continue to strengthen the Church of Christ and all churches that open in your name. We thank you, Father, for all you've done and what you will do in the future. Amen.
amen.
Okay, so we're here today primarily to discuss COVID-19. We're very interested in all the questions that will be asked throughout this meeting. So please formulate your questions, get them in line, and be ready to ask your questions. We hope to present some knowledge initially. Dr. Ed Vance will do that, followed by questions and answers. And we're trying to make it an hour meeting so no one will get bored, and we'll be in here and out of here. So we'll start out first by acknowledging that we do have a crisis. We do have a problem. There's a novel virus among us. Novel means it's brand new. We've never been exposed to it. And as such, we have no immunity against it. We need to do something to improve our chances of surviving this virus if it enters our body. We have science behind us. We have studies behind us. We have information that can tell us and guide us in the direction that we need to go. We first, back in 2019, when this thing started, we were just naked. There was no chance of any type of immunity. But since the advent of these vaccines, we have come a long way. And one of our goals today is to make sure that you understand the utility of the vaccine and the power of the vaccine in terms of dealing with this situation of COVID-19. We know that we now have an unprecedented number of people in the hospital, and some are even dying, and many who are dying have never received the vaccine. And so we want to make sure we answer all questions about the vaccine, because we're very interested in everyone participating in it if they're 12 years of age or older. So we'll start out first with Dr. Ed Vance. But before we get there, I would like every panelist to at least introduce themselves with a brief statement. First of all, my name is DeVale Young. I'm an internist, Medical Associate of Albany, been in Albany for 35 years. I said I will practice 40 years, so you'll have me a little while longer. And I'm just happy to be here today. Ed, you next.
Thank you, Dr. Young. I'm Dr. Ed Vance. I'm Chief Medical Officer with Albany Area Primary Healthcare. You might be familiar with some of our clinics: East Albany Medical Center, South Albany Medical Center. We've opened up a new one in Albany Northwest family. I personally work at Lee Medical Arts Center, and I saw our operations manager, Phyllis Colvin, is on the Zoom, and also one of our vaccine expert physicians, Dr. Francis Ferguson, is on the Zoom. So shout out to y'all and thank y'all for being present. But I'm originally from Atlanta. I went to undergrad at Morehouse College. I did my medical school at Emory University Medical School, training in internal medicine residency at University of Illinois at Chicago. I came here in 2003, joined AAPHC and never left. And then I was chief of staff at Phoebe Putney Memorial Hospital 2014, 2016. And I've been chief medical officer with APHC for the last several years. So I'm happy to be a part of this panel. Also a proud new member of Kappa Alpha Psi, and along with my brother, Dr. Hurd. So, yo.
My friends. Derek, you're next. Dr. Hurd.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Derek Hurd. I'm a local product. I'm originally from Leesburg, Georgia. Went to Lee County High School, graduated there in 1991. I'm a graduate of Albany State University in 1995 with a degree in biology. And I graduated from the Medical College of Georgia in 1999 and came back to Albany to do my residency at Southwest Georgia Family Practice Residency Program. I was in private practice for a number of years and then joined Phoebe in 2011. And I became the medical director for primary care for Phoebe Physician Group in 2018. So I am so glad to be a part of this panel to give you all information. And I just want you all to know that there is no question that is off the table because this is information providing situation. So please, once we're done with the presentation, ask any questions that you may have because there is no bad question. Thank you.
Thank you, Derek. Dr. Black.
Morning. My name is James Black. I'm also from Albany, Georgia. I attended Albany State University and graduated in 1989. I then went to the Ohio State University and attended College of Medicine there. After that, served time on active duty in the U.S. Navy as a flight surgeon, and then completed my residency in emergency medicine at Tampa General Hospital. For the last, 2 decades, I've also worked with Homeland Security involving bioterrorism education, hospital preparedness, and actually teaching about pandemics for the last, 20 years, never expecting that we would be on the front edge of a pandemic, and experienced that in my lifetime. So I currently serve as the medical director for emergency services for Phoebe Putney Health System, and I'm glad to be invited to have this discussion.
Okay, thank you. I think Dr. Grant could not make it. I don't think you're there, are you, Dr. Grant? No. But Tanya, Dr. Smith, pediatrician who joined the group, happy to have her on board so she can ask any of those pediatric questions. Tanya, can you introduce yourself?
Good afternoon. My name is Tanya Smith. I'm a pediatrician here in Albany. I'm originally from Oakland, California. I went to Yale University undergrad, graduated 1994, Morehouse School of Medicine 1999, and Kaiser Permanente residency program in Oakland, California 2002. Came for National Health Service Corps in 2002 to Albany with a planned stint of 3 years that has now extended to 19 years, and opened my own practice, Prestige Pediatrics, 12 years ago. And happy to be on the talk to talk about COVID-19 and its effect in pediatrics.
Thank you, Dr. Smith. So that's our panel. We're gonna allow Dr. Ed Vance to give us some information pertaining to the virus. He had a PowerPoint presentation, and I hope that he can keep it nice and sweet. And this information will hopefully suffice to get us started with our questions and answers.
All right, DeVille, can you see my presentation?
I can.
Okay.
I see your computer screen at least.
All right, can you see the, it says COVID-19 vaccine education module?
Not yet, I just see the computer screen.
Okay.
It did come up and then there it is, that's it.
Is it there? Okay, it's on my other screen. All right, well, good afternoon, everybody. I'll try to make this as brief as I can, but I've been doing this presentation all year, literally since the vaccines became available in December of last year. And, I've hoped that this presentation would end at some point, meaning that, the majority of America, if not the world, would be vaccinated by now, but unfortunately that's not the case. So we'll keep doing this until we get as high a number as we can get, 75% or higher. And so again, my name is Ed Vance, John Vance. I'm the Chief Medical Officer at Albany Area Primary Healthcare. We're a large group, community health center, have probably up to 30 plus sites now. And I actually gave this presentation. We required all of our employees, not just our doctors, not just our nurses, but all of our employees to complete this education module, to answer the questions at the end. So hint, there is a quiz at the end. So please pay attention. I'm going to call on some of you all if you don't volunteer. It's easy. The answers are listed in red, so I'm not trying to make this hard. I want people to learn this information because we all need to know it. So starting out, we have the originally 2 vaccines. Now we have 3, and there are more across the world. But the 2 main vaccines you probably heard about are the Pfizer/BioNTech vaccine and Mrna. They're both what are called mRNA vaccines. They both require at least 2 doses as of now. We're hearing about there's going to be a booster probably recommended pretty soon next month. But when they were tested, and they were thoroughly tested, both of them were close to 95% effective in preventing COVID disease. So you do have to complete both vaccines. We're learning that the duration of protection does tend to wane after about 6 to 8 months now. But one of the things that I think we need to know, especially as African Americans, is that when these studies were done, were we included in the studies? Were African Americans specifically included in the studies? Well, we make up as African Americans about 10 to 13% of the American population. And sure enough, in both of these studies, 10% of the participants were African Americans. So we know that this has been looked at specifically within our population. So, and these were excellent studies. When doctors look at studies, they look for high numbers of people being enrolled in studies. The Pfizer study had up to 45,000 people enrolled. The Mrna had over 30,000. It was at 150 different clinical sites for Pfizer, which included 39 states, 89 clinical sites for Mrna, which included 32 different states. And majority of the patients at that time were middle-aged between 56 to 85. Mrna was over 45 majority. So this was a well-designed study. This is a study that doctors can definitely trust. We're not just going off of conjecture. So how do these vaccines work? The Pfizer and Mrna vaccines, they're mRNA vaccines, messenger RNA vaccines. And mRNA is basically just a little piece of genetic material. It's not the whole virus. It's actually the spike protein. So if you've ever seen pictures of the coronavirus, there was one on my first slide. It's got all these little spikes all over it. Those are the spike proteins. And it's kind of where coronaviruses get their name from, because when you look at them under high-powered microscopes, it almost looks like it's a crown on the piece of virus. So corona, Latin, is crown. So that's coronavirus. So that's what's being introduced to, through the vaccine. Once it's inside of our bodies recognize that as foreign material, and it's destroyed. But before it's destroyed, our bodies learn to make copies of it so that it can recognize that material if it's ever reintroduced to our bodies again, i.e. if we ever get COVID exposed to the coronavirus. And then we produce our own antibodies to protect us from that virus. So some of the facts about these vaccines, these mRNA vaccines did not affect our DNA. They did not enter our cell nucleus. And you cannot get COVID from the vaccines. You cannot get the actual disease from the vaccines. These vaccines are new, but the technology for mRNA is not new. It's been used for the past decade or more. And they've actually been used in the past to study vaccines for influenza, the Zika virus, rabies, and cytomegalovirus, to name a few. So are they safe? We had at least 8 weeks of safety data that was back originally last year. And everyone realized that there are some common side effects that can happen after you get the vaccine. You potentially could have fevers, chills, headaches, muscle aches, fatigue, and tiredness. This is often more common after the second dose. And a few people, small number, like with any medicine or any vaccine, could have an allergic reaction. That's pretty rare. But no one so far has died from as a direct result of these vaccines. And the safety of the vaccines is monitored constantly by several agencies, but the top 3 agencies are the FDA, of course, the Food and Drug Administration, the ACIP. This is a scientific group that not many people outside of medicine are aware of. They're the Advisory Committee on Immunization. They're an independent group that signs off on vaccines, judges the safety of them, and is involved heavily in their approval. And then, of course, there's the CDC, which we've all heard of in Atlanta, the Centers for Disease Control. So, these are independent committees. There are other ones, the VRBPAC, I won't get into them, but they are independent of each other. They're independent of the government in terms of approving vaccines. So, any president, any senator, congressman can't step in and say, you need to approve this vaccine, even though it's not safe. And of course, there are vaccine safety monitoring systems. So in addition to those agencies, there are these sites out here, these systems. There's VAERS, which is probably most well known to us as doctors, the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System. You should be given this access to this site if you get a vaccine and be told that if you have an adverse reaction, if you have something bad happen to you after you get a vaccine and you're concerned it was from the vaccine, you can report that to this site. And they'll keep track of those events. They can contact you and find out more information. But in addition to VAERS, there's several others. There's VSD, CISA, BEST. I won't go into details about them, but there's constant monitoring of what happens with vaccines after you receive them. Now, a question that we get as doctors often is, weren't these vaccines just made too fast? Well, the answer to that is no. And there's reasons behind that. The reason is researchers actually had a head start on vaccine development because, like I said before, they've been using mRNA technology for over a decade, and specifically studying coronaviruses for over a decade or more. Also, the vaccine manufacturing started simultaneously while the clinical trials were underway. So basically, these companies took a big risk, before they ever knew if the vaccines would work for sure, before they ever knew if the vaccines were completely safe, they invested heavily, a lot of money to go ahead and just start making these vaccines in real time. That gave them a jump. So they didn't have to wait till the trials were over. They were going ahead and manufacturing these vaccines and having them ready in the event that these vaccines would be proven effective and safe. Now, there are some companies besides Pfizer and Mrna that tried to develop vaccines that you haven't heard of because their vaccines didn't pan out. They lost a lot of money. And so, stock brokers probably know about them, but we don't. The mRNA vaccines, they're faster to produce in larger amounts than traditional vaccines due to the type of technology advances. So, this isn't 50 years ago where you had to labor in a lab forever and ever to make a product. These vaccines can be made, extremely fast, and that's a good thing. That's not a bad thing. The FDA and the CDC, they prioritize the review, the authorization, and recommendations for these vaccines. So basically, a lot of the red tape was cut. It was, sped up, but corners weren't cut. So that's important to know. Just because these vaccines were prioritized because this is an extremely bad pandemic doesn't mean they were cutting corners. They just didn't let papers sit on someone's desk. They just didn't let emails go unread. Everybody was on high alert, in DEFCON 1 mode to make sure that these vaccines were evaluated as quickly as possible. So I often get from patients, well, I'm on the fence about getting the vaccine. So back in October of last year, they did do a poll, and they found that only 58% of the general public said they would actually receive a vaccine. And that's actually panned out to be pretty true because we know we're really in America only at about 50% of our population being vaccinated. And we know we have 12 and under who aren't even eligible to get a vaccine. They haven't had a vaccine authorized for their use. So that might make up the other 8%. So some of the common questions, are there side effects? Does it work? Is it safe? How much does it cost? The answer to that one, I can say immediately, it's free. So that's probably the greatest thing about these vaccines. They're free. Why should I get it? And why shouldn't I just wait and see? Why don't you just wait, to let people test it out, get it in a couple of years, and, once everything's good. Well, why should you get the vaccine? Well, you should get the vaccines for a couple of reasons. One is personal. These vaccines have been proven in medical studies to decrease a person's chance of ending up in the hospital or dying from COVID-19. Right there is why you should get the vaccine. You know, you might get COVID and get away with not being extremely sick, or you may not even have any symptoms, but there's a chance out there you could get extremely sick, end up in the hospital, and even die. And that is enough reason right there to get the vaccine. And there are 620,000 plus patients who have died from COVID that probably shouldn't have died. And so for no other reason other than just to protect yourself, why not lower your risk of dying or ending up in the hospital? Because ending up in the hospital with COVID can be just as bad, if not worse. You know, being, you know, inconvenienced, having a lot of tubes in your body, a lot of medicines pumped into you is a horrible experience that nobody should want to go through. And there's even the process after the hospital where you may be chronically ill. You may feel terrible for weeks to months, who knows, even years on end. There's also a public health reason that the vaccines, they're actually the best chance for us to end this pandemic. You know, there's some data that shows that the more we're vaccinated, the less the virus transmits and is spread. And Dr. Fauci, everybody's heard of Dr. Fauci with NIH, National Institutes of Health, says that we really need more than 75% of our population to reach herd immunity. And that's not just in America, that's really in the world, because as long as coronavirus is running free in, you know, India, Africa, Buenos Aires, wherever, we're going to feel the effect eventually with these different variants out there. You know, the Delta variant eventually was originally in India. We heard about it there, and it wasn't too much longer before it came here, and it's with us, and we're in the midst of the Delta variant. Why should I get the vaccine? Well, as African Americans, unfortunately, we actually die more often at a higher rate, 3 times higher than other Americans. African Americans, like I said before, we make up about 13% of the American population. At the time I made these slides earlier this year, we only made up about 5% of the American population that had received a COVID vaccine. That's horrible. That's terrible. You know, that's less than half of where we should have been. At that same moment in time, white Americans made up 60% of the population, and they also made up 60% of the Americans vaccinated. So basically, they were right at where they should be in terms of getting vaccinated for the most part. So, you know, and that was back when there was only certain groups eligible, like over 65 or people who were healthcare providers, et cetera. So we don't want to be left out in the cold as African Americans. You know, ABC News put out this slide at the time, and it really, you know, visualizes the disparity. You can see here in Mississippi, I believe we have some Mississippi origin people here. At that time, the population in Mississippi, 40% of them had been vaccinated who were eligible. You got to remember, this is only healthcare professionals or elderly. But in terms of African Americans and their percentage, it was only a little close to 20%. So we were not getting vaccinated the way we should have, you know, whether it was due to fear about the vaccine or logistical issues, it just wasn't happening at the time. So some more questions about COVID-19 vaccines. Again, the vaccines cannot give you COVID-19. If you've gotten sick with COVID already, you should still get the vaccine. Yes, you get some natural immunity from the process, but we don't know how much. We don't know how long it lasts. And it's not as robust, it's not as strong as the immunity that the vaccines produce. And you can get COVID again, it happens. You can get COVID, COVID doesn't care. It'll infect you and reinfect you. Bill Gates, I really shouldn't have to say this, Bill Gates did not put microchips in the vaccines to track you. There's no way to do that, he can't do that. But unfortunately, because of probably social media and different places, some people believe that, but that's not true. COVID-19 vaccines will not cause you to test positive on the test for COVID-19. So how do we know they're safe? Again, the FDA, the ACIP, the CDC, they all are constantly reviewing these vaccines. Is it safe to get the vaccines if you've had allergies? Yes. The only absolute contraindication to getting a COVID-19 vaccine is having an allergic reaction to a previous COVID-19 vaccine. So if you got your first dose of Mrna and you had an allergic reaction, you may need not to get the second dose, or you may need to discuss that with your physician. But people who have a lot of allergies, maybe say to antibiotics or other medicines, or maybe even allergies to a lot of vaccines, of course, discuss it with your physician, but it's really not, you really still can go ahead and get the vaccine. What we do though, in those situations is watch those patients closer and longer for 30 minutes. Usually we watch patients 15 minutes after getting any vaccine. We watch these patients 30 minutes, and we try to prepare if there's an allergic reaction to have Benadryl on hand, steroids in hand, to give them to reverse the allergic process. But that's not a fault of the vaccine. That's just, going to happen with any medicine or vaccine. Is it safe to get a COVID-19 vaccine if I'm pregnant or breastfeeding? Earlier in the year, I had this slide. The answer was, I don't know, but we think it's safe. Now the answer is absolutely yes, it is safe to get it. The CDC, Dr. Rochelle Walensky, the director of the CDC, she came out a couple of weeks ago, August 11th, and said this statement: the CDC encourages all pregnant people or people who are thinking about becoming pregnant and those breastfeeding to get vaccinated to protect themselves from the COVID-19. So basically, yes. And I'll give you this story. I worked at Phoebe in the hospital this past weekend. They give us a panel of 15 to 20 patients to round on at a time. My very first patient on one of the wards, because just about all the wards are COVID wards now, was a 32-year-old woman who had been pregnant, and she had to have her baby taken out by C-section, probably too early, because she was extremely sick with COVID. She ended up in the ICU. She was on a ventilator. She had a tube down her throat for weeks. And by the time I saw her, she had come out of the ICU, but she still looked extremely ill. And, that's no way to start out your life with your new baby. Some of these women don't survive because, majority of pregnant women were not getting vaccinated prior to this Delta variant. So definitely the answer is yes. The CDC has signed off on that. If you're pregnant or you're thinking about getting pregnant, or you know somebody that could get pregnant, please go out and tell them to get a vaccine. We don't want them to lose out on the chance to be a mother. Have these vaccines been tested in all populations? Yes. Like I showed in one of my first slides, they tested them in all different races, all different genders, all different locations, states, etc. They really didn't leave anyone out, except at that time, they didn't test in pediatric patients and they didn't test in pregnant women. Since then, the tests in pregnant women have been completed. The tests in children are ongoing, especially the ones under age 12. But yes, they tested in all different peoples, not just one population. Is it better to get natural immunity rather than immunity from the vaccines? Meaning, why not just wait and get COVID and out now be immune? That's terrible. If you get COVID-19, obviously, it's a dice game. It's a roll of the dice. You put yourself at risk of serious illness or even dying. And if we just let everybody just go out and get COVID, and some not reputable doctors have actually suggested this in the public, that would mean 320 million getting COVID. That, by the statistic numbers, that would end up with 6.4 million deaths. That's not acceptable. And a lot more than that will be chronically, constantly ill. So no, we don't want to wait and just get COVID. Will the shot hurt? Will it make me sick? What about side effects? Again, you can't get COVID from the vaccine. The most common side effect of the vaccine is actually no side effects. 60% of patients who get the vaccines have absolutely no side effects. That included me. I got my vaccines back on December 18th and my second dose January 13th. Other than a little, soreness in my arm, I had no side effects. And so that's not uncommon. But if you do get side effects, it's not a bad thing. They go away in a couple days, and they're actually a sign that your body's reacting to the vaccine and are producing those antibodies that it should to help you fight off COVID if you do get it. So again, you can get side effects in about 40% of patients. You know, they vary from fevers, chills, body aches, headaches, fatigue, can be mild to severe, but they're temporary, and it's much better than getting COVID. How do we know these vaccines are safe since they're so new? What about long-term side effects? So again, you got these scientific agencies, the FDA, the ACIP, the CDC, monitoring safety constantly. You may have heard there's the third vaccine, Johnson & Johnson or Janssen. Initially it's a one-shot vaccine, and there were some studies there were some reports that there were some type of special blood clots that could have occurred with that vaccine. It only happened in a small number of women, from what I've read. And once that was picked up, that vaccine was paused. You know, the CDC and the FDA came out and required a pause on that vaccine. We stopped giving that vaccine. And that gave them time to review the data, to find out if this is a dedicated, true trend, and should they pull that vaccine off the market. And once they reviewed all the data, they found out that the safety was still there, that was not a consistent occurrence. It was not a definite relation to that vaccine. So they later came back and allowed us to go back and start giving that vaccine again, because the benefit of preventing COVID outweighed the danger associated with these vaccines. So, you know, you may have more concern about that vaccine, but in reality, I think physicians are reassured that the whole process is working because of that pause. You know, they basically found a needle in the haystack. They found a few cases out of millions and millions of doses where this occurred. So that shows you they're keeping a close eye. They're like hawks looking at what happens after people get vaccines. And so, you know, what we need to remember though, and what we need to be concerned about the safety of or the danger of is COVID. Because COVID, at the time I make this slide, there was over 500,000 Americans that died from COVID. Now, that number is more like over 620,000. So we need to be concerned about COVID. The vaccines present little to no danger to us. And again, 0 patients have actually died directly from getting the vaccine, regardless of what you might find on the internet. So how many doses are needed and why? The Pfizer, Mrna need 2 shots. The Johnson & Johnson needs 1 shot. And by the way, this vaccine is actually a different type of vaccine than Moderna and Pfizer. It's a more traditional, what we call adenovirus vector vaccine. So it's just a different way of making the vaccine. You need at least 3 weeks apart from the Pfizer, 4 weeks apart from the Mrna. The first shot primes your immune system, helping it recognize the virus. The second shot strengthens that immune system. And of course, we're hearing about potential booster shots for everyone maybe next month after 8 months. But the CDC did authorize to go ahead and start giving a 3rd shot to immunocompromised patients, patients who've had organ transplants, patients who've had drugs that they received that just suppress their immune system, patients who have diseases that suppress their immune system by themselves, such as lupus or AIDS, or patients who've had stem cell transplants. Those are patients who should receive a 3rd shot already, at least 28 days after their 2nd shot. And that's because those immune compromised patients, they never mounted enough of an immune response to begin with after the 2nd shot, we find out. And you know, what we see in the hospitals, like Dr. Black mentioned, the majority of the patients in the hospital now with COVID never had any vaccine. But the few patients in the hospital who are in the hospital and were vaccinated usually were immunocompromised patients. So they never really mounted the appropriate immune response. So we're finding that they actually needed a 3rd shot to begin with. So do I have to continue to wear a mask and avoid close contact with others after I've been vaccinated? Yes, we do. You know, the vaccines are just one part of the strategy to fight COVID. You know, I think that's part of the reason the Delta variant overcame America so severely, is because, you know, we were becoming complacent. We thought you know, around June, we thought COVID, the pandemic, was starting to go away. America as a whole, we were down to about 10,000 cases, you know, a day of COVID. And so, you know, 50% of the population have been vaccinated. So, you know, why not walk around without your mask a little more? Why not worry about social distancing? Why not just go back to a concert, you know, et cetera? It seemed more safe. You know, unfortunately, while we were letting our guard down back in June, or earlier, the COVID didn't care. It was ramping up. It made itself stronger. It became a Delta variant, came over here from India to America, and then strongly is infecting us right now. That's why we're on Zoom as we speak. So yes, we've got to continue to social distance. Yes, we've got to continue to wear our mask, because even once you're vaccinated, you don't want to get it to begin with. You could still get ill, and that's not fun. And you don't want to spread it to your family members. You don't want to spread it to your friends. So you got to do the 3 W's: wear a mask, watch your distance, and wash your hands. Again, I keep going over side effects. Yes, these vaccines can cause side effects. It's actually more common not to have side effects, but these vaccines are reactogenic. That means your body reacts to these vaccines. That's the whole point. So you can get fevers, you can get chills, you can get body aches, you can get headaches, you can get fatigue, but don't confuse these side effects with having actual COVID-19. It's not the same thing. The vaccines cannot give you COVID-19. So, these side effects mean you've got a good immune response, and they're generally short-lived. So go ahead, if you haven't had a vaccine, hopefully I'm preaching to the choir and everybody on the Zoom has already had their vaccine, but if you haven't, don't not do anything. Schedule a vaccine appointment. And also, if you not ready to do that, at least go back and read and research more about the vaccine from credible sources. Credible sources do not include TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube. None of those are credible sources. Anybody can put anything on any of those social medias. You want to go to your Dr. Young, you want to go to your Dr. Black, you want to go to your Dr. Hurd, your Dr. Ferguson, your Dr. Tanya Smith, your Dr. Vance. You want to go to your trusted doctors, ask them. If you don't have a personal doctor, go to your health department, ask them for information, or look it up yourself on credible websites like the CDC or the FDA. And, if you do want to schedule an appointment, well, it's just so happens there is a vaccination event happening tomorrow at Mount Zion Church over there on 901 South Westover Boulevard. My organization, Albany Area Primary Healthcare, is partnering with Phoebe and with churches to put this on. And anyone age 12 and above can go there and get a vaccine. It's going on from 12 p.m. to 2 p.m. tomorrow, Sunday, after church. So you need to wear your face mask, have some photo ID, and be at least 12 or older. They're providing both the Mrna and the Pfizer vaccine. So spread that word if you know anybody that hasn't had a vaccine. So now for the quiz. So I do want people to answer, because hopefully nobody fell asleep while I was talking. And if nobody says anything, I'm gonna have to call somebody out. So question 1, how effective are the mRNA vaccines at preventing illness from COVID? Anyone, you can unmute yourself.
B.
Answer B, you said?
B, 95%.
Oh, C, 95%. You're correct. That's absolutely correct. They're 95% effective. What percentage of African Americans were included in the studies of the 2 vaccines?
10.
That's correct, 10%. Can the 2 COVID vaccines give you COVID? Yes or no?
No.
That's
No.
correct. That's correct. Which of the reactions below is not a common side effect of the 2 vaccines? Fevers and chills, headaches and muscle aches?
Death.
Yes,
D.
correct. That's it. What is the most common side effect of the 2 vaccines?
No side effects.
No side effect.
Absolutely. If side effects happen from the 2 COVID vaccines, how long do they typically last?
24, 48 hours.
That's correct. What have the 2 COVID vaccines been proven to help to prevent in medical studies?
See?
That's correct. Being so sick from COVID that you're admitted to the hospital or die. That's what the whole purpose of these vaccines is, to prevent you from dying, to prevent you from being in Dr. Black's ER and getting admitted to the hospital. Are African Americans dying from COVID more often than other groups in America?
Yes.
Yes.
Unfortunately, the answer is yes. Are African Americans getting the COVID vaccine as much as other groups in America?
No.
No.
Unfortunately, no. Which expert scientific groups are constantly checking the safety of the two vaccines?
CDC.
D.
All of them.
Oh,
The answer, yes, you're all right. The answer is all of the above. The CDC, the FDA, the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices. There's more than one group monitoring safety. There's not just one person in the office somewhere looking at safety. There's multiple people and groups looking. How many people have died from taking the mRNA COVID vaccines?
none.
620,000.
And that's not right. So the answer is none.
None.
620,000 of interest is actually the number of people that have died from
Died
coronavirus.
from it. That's right.
That's the number of people that have died from coronavirus. And 150 million is actually the number of people that have received a COVID vaccine, or approximately the number that have received the vaccine. So if you're waiting and seeing, there's no reason to wait and see. There's 150 million people ahead of you that have already had these vaccines for almost a year now. Which of the following are not credible sources of information about the two vaccines?
D.
Definitely. And the street committee is not credible. I've seen Dr. Young be in the street committee, but not about COVID vaccines. So, you know, and that's it. That's all. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Dr. Vance. Yeah, I think the main take-home point here is that there's a three-pronged approach here. That's social distancing, that mask, as well as the vaccine. We're now up to about 38% of the population in Dougherty County vaccinated, 33% that's received 2 doses. So we still have a ways to go. Dr. Black, if you're still there, I know you have a very busy schedule. I'm gonna have you say a few words about what's happening in the emergency room. You're on the front line. You get to see everything coming in, and I know Phoebe is now on diversion. You can't get anybody in the hospital, and all elective procedures have been postponed. So thank you a lot, Dr. Vance, and I hope everyone is forming some questions going forward. But Dr. Black, can you say a few words about the emergency room?
Yes, sir, I can tell you that, and this is not just Phoebe, this is across the state and across the country. Emergency departments are full and hospitals are full. And what it does, not only are we taking care of illnesses that are potentially preventable, or at least the progression to the state, and that's what's so disheartening. You know, last March and April, when we were at the front of this, we didn't have many options, but now we have options that people are not taking advantage of, and that's what's disheartening. And the downstream effect of that is it kind of affects your ability. You know, I mean, we're still taking care of traumas, heart attacks, strokes in the face of having a full hospital. Now, you know, this cannot continue if we're going to continue to deliver high level care. And again, not just here, this is everywhere. Everybody is full, nobody has room. So think about how that affects your ability when your loved one starts having chest pain or stroke-like symptoms, or unfortunately gets into an accident. We're still going to do the best we can to take care of them, but there's literally no room. So right now, believe it or not, we actually have more patients in the hospital than we did during our initial surge when we were ranked number 4 in the world behind Wuhan, China, Lombardy region of Italy, and New York City in terms of the COVID death rate. Last week, we were above 214 patients, which is a high watermark that we had during this surge right now. And although our numbers are down slightly, some of that is due to actually some discharges, but also, and we had 17 people that died during the last week from coronavirus, all 17 of whom were not vaccinated. 7% of the patients that are in the hospital right now for COVID, 87% of those patients are not vaccinated. 13% have been vaccinated, so we do have some breakthrough infections, but those patients are typically not as sick. They don't stay in the hospital as long. There's 61 patients in our ICUs, and all 61 of those patients have not been vaccinated. The question I want to pose to you, a couple of points. Number one, Dr. Vance talked about how long we have been working on the vaccines. Not only was the technology available for over a decade, but we actually had a genetic material. And I say we, I'm not a bench virologist, but I interact with a lot of virologists. They actually had the genetic material before we had our first diagnosed case in the United States. China distributed this to the world's leading virologists, asking for help way before we ever saw it on our coast, on our shores rather. Secondly, I always like to ask people, how much did you struggle when you had polio? How many people do you know died from smallpox? How did your parents do from meningitis? And the question is, you get this quizzical look on their face, and the reason is because they were vaccinated. So we shouldn't have this such a fear of vaccines. There are a lot of diseases that we've been virtually eliminated because we're able to vaccinate people. So I just want people to keep those things in mind when they're making the decision. And I fully respect everyone's decision, a right to make decisions right for them and their family. I just hope we use good information when we're arriving at decision. This morning in the emergency department, I have seen, I'm out in Worth County, and I have seen 22 people so far, and 14 of those have had coronavirus. 10 of those are less than the age of 18. All right. So, no, none of them, one person had the first vaccination, but nobody's been fully vaccinated that I've seen. So this is rampant. It's running through the community. The Delta variant is much more efficient than the original coronavirus that was out. Okay, so that. And the other point I want to bring up, Dr. Vance mentioned there are many more vaccines than the 3 we use in the United States that have been granted approval here. But there are also many more variants that we know about. There are not just 4 variants. There's over 24 variants. Some of those are considered variants of interest, and they have not shown to have more aggressive or a bad effect. And then some variants of concern, like the Delta variant, that's become more aggressive. It is only a matter of time if we allow the virus to circulate in the population. It's only a matter of time before it finds a way to be somewhat resistant to the vaccines we have available to us. That's why it's important for everyone to get vaccinated so we can tamp down the disease. Viruses need an accessible living human host or living host in order to grow and replicate. If we vaccinate the majority of the host, the virus has nowhere to turn and it can peter out. And that's the point. But if we allow it to kick around, allow it to become smarter, allow it to modulate and mutate, it eventually will become resistant, and we'll be looking at how do we then adjust our vaccination process. So there's a lot of implications, much greater than getting a vaccine. And I want to make one last point, and I spoke to a bunch of students. I've spoken at Doherty High School, then yesterday in Monroe. I'm going to Westover tomorrow, principally talking to the athletic teams, to the population in general. And they always ask this question. I've taken care of hundreds of patients with coronavirus. I have admitted hundreds of patients with coronavirus. I've seen over 100 coronavirus patients die. All right, some of them have been my friends. I have yet to take care of a person in the emergency department that had a bad reaction from being vaccinated. I took care of one patient that had a seizure after being vaccinated, but after we resuscitated and revived him, turns out he's had a seizure disorder and he stopped taking his medication a month and a half before. It was not due to the vaccination. I have yet to take care of anybody that's had a serious reaction. But I tell you, people are still getting admitted, people are still suffering, dying from coronavirus. So please, your options and choose to get vaccinated.
All right, thank you, Dr. Black. Just remember, everyone, that we're dealing with a living organism that wants to survive, just like we want to survive. And it's doing all it can to survive. And if it has a host that has not been vaccinated, that cannot kill it, cannot deal with it, it will get stronger and stronger over time. It will mutate so that it can survive. And we have to reach this herd immunity. More people need to be vaccinated. Again, we have only about 38% in Doherty County has been partially vaccinated, and 33% that has gotten both vaccines. Dr. Hurd, I read yesterday that Phoebe has extended antibody infusions to individuals able to call in themselves and set it up. Prior to last week, it appeared that one of the greatest things that we have available for individuals that has not gotten the vaccine or even gotten the vaccine who gotten sick from the coronavirus has been this antibody infusion. And this may actually keep people out of Dr. Black's emergency room and out of the hospital. And it's good to have the antibody infusion available. Prior to that, of course, doctor offices had to make the referral, but now I hear that the referral can be made by the patient. And even more importantly, there's going to be units set up outside the emergency room for individuals who have been recently diagnosed with COVID to get the antibody infusion right outside of the hospital. So Dr. Hurd, could you speak on that and anything else?
Thank you all again for inviting us to be here. Dr. Young, one of the things that you're bringing up, and I really think we need to stress this, outside of vaccination, we don't have very many things that can help treat COVID-19. And when I say that, I think people really need to hear what I'm saying, because you're going to see on social media, you're going to see, you're going to hear from the street committee, as Dr. Vance said, all these other things that supposedly can treat COVID. There are no treatments for COVID. Ivermectin does not treat COVID, at least not in vivo, okay? And in vivo means inside the human body. They have studied it outside of the human body, but they have not studied it inside the human body. And from what we're seeing, ivermectin takes about 100 times what is recommended dose for treatment that we usually use it for, to possibly be antiviral. So ivermectin does not work, okay? All these other things that they talk about, your vitamin D, your zinc, your B complex vitamins, hydroxychloroquine, these things have not been shown to treat COVID. And I need you to hear this, because the street committee is saying now, oh, if you catch COVID, why don't you just take one of these things and that'll work? That's not enough. Great, vitamin D, zinc, your multivitamins, they are good for helping build your immune system up, and that's great. But as I think Dr. Young and Dr. Vance both pointed out, your body actually has to have had some interaction with COVID virus to be able to fend it off. And the problem is, if you catch COVID, your body may not have enough time to fend it off. So you don't want to wait. Yes, you want to build up your immune system, but a built up immune system in and of itself does not stop you from getting very sick from COVID, because unless you have been exposed to it before, your body does not recognize it and cannot defend it off. Now, that being said, we do have a treatment out there right now that can help reduce some of the symptoms, symptom severity and length of symptoms, and that's called monoclonal antibodies. Basically, we have been able to manufacture antibodies that are used to fight off the infection. So antibodies that we would normally make in our bodies that have been specifically produced for COVID are being manufactured and then given to us. That can be done, and needs to be done within, I believe it's 7 days of, within 10 days of exposure to someone that has COVID or testing positive for COVID. So if you have tested positive for COVID, you need to speak with your primary care physician so that they can make that referral for you. And I would say that might be the best way to do it. Although you can self-refer, I think the better way of doing it is to make sure that you speak to your primary care physician so that they can then make the referral for you, so that there are less hoops for you to jump through. But it is an infusion. It lasts anywhere from 1 to 2 hours. And then after that, you're able to go home. We're not seeing any side effects from the monoclonal antibodies. And right now it's been authorized. It's been given emergency use authorization for anybody 12 and over, particularly those with compromised immune systems, those who are at high risk for serious illness. So again, we only have right now one quote unquote treatment that has been authorized for COVID, and that's monoclonal antibodies. You need to go through your primary care physician to get them to set you up to get that done. But using things such as hydroxychloroquine, ivermectin, vitamin D, these things have not been proven to work. And I do not want you to sit at home thinking that these things are going to work for you, and then you end up sick. We've seen this too many times. I had to admit a patient this week who got COVID, was not vaccinated, thought that they could take care of it with vitamin D and zinc, and then they ended up having significant illness, ended up getting clots in their legs and almost had to have their leg amputated yesterday. I was barely able to get them into the hospital. As Dr. Black said, there's no more room in the inn. And so that person had to sit in the emergency room for over a day waiting for a room to become available so they could be admitted and could have the surgery that they needed to save their limb. That's the other thing I want to say real quick, is that we think about the respiratory illness that we get from COVID, but we're not thinking about all the other illnesses that you can get that are long-term problems from COVID. Some of you have heard of the cognitive impairment called brain fog. I currently suffer from that right now. as someone that uses his brain as part of his job, when you're not able to remember certain words, or you're not remembering how to do certain things, that's very difficult. That is real. It does exist. We have people who are having long-term neurologic problems. I have a patient right now who cannot go back to work because they're in constant neurologic pain from having had COVID. I have a patient who has chronic weakness from having COVID. I have a patient right now who got COVID this past April, has not been back to work because their muscles are too sore and their CPK levels are too elevated to go back to work. So we think about death and dying, which we should with COVID, and that's bad, but there are a whole host of other problems that you can get from COVID that are not necessarily deadly, but are just as significant in terms of how it affects your life. So again, please, we need to take this illness seriously. We need to make sure that we're getting credible medical advice, as Dr. Vance said, from respected individuals. You can get any information off the internet, but all information ain't good information. You need to trust the people that you're getting it from, because anybody on the internet can say that they're a physician or they're a doctor or they're a virologist or they're an epidemiologist, but that doesn't mean that it's so. You need to go to reputable websites that you can trust. So I always recommend to my patients, CDC, NIH, Johns Hopkins, Cleveland Clinic, Mayo Clinic, Emory University, Stanford University, Harvard Medical School. These are good, reputable websites that you can go to get information that's going to be credible. Going to COVIDvaccine.com may not be the best place, because that could be someone with a hidden agenda. As medical providers, we don't have a hidden agenda. The information that we want to give you is information that's going to be helpful and that's going to be credible, because we have gotten into this profession to save lives, not to take lives from people. And I want to leave you with one last point. My 10-year-old right now has COVID. We found out this week. He was at school. He was around people, you know, he wore his mask every day. He was around people that were not required to mask, because the Lee County school system does not require you to wear a mask, and they do not social distance. So again, to Dr. Vance's point, we need to make sure that we continue to mask, and everyone needs to mask. And we need to maintain social distancing guidelines, which is 6 feet, because if not, you can catch COVID. Now, luckily, he's a healthy 10-year-old. And so far, other than fatigue, he's not having any significant symptoms. But guess what? He could have. And because he could have, that means I could have lost my son. And I would hate to lose my son to a preventable illness. So again, thank you all, and we're going to be available for questions after.
And so, of course, our best bet for dealing with this virus going forward, if you're exposed to it, is the vaccine. And I think everybody's trying to get that point over, but not everyone is able to get the vaccine. If you're 12 or less, you can't get it. I mean, under the age of 12, you can't get it. We're hoping that information will come out towards the end of the year, and we'll be able to vaccinate those at least 5 to 12. So Dr. Smith, what are you seeing in the pediatric population? Are the parents excited about getting their 12 and older children vaccinated? Are you seeing any kind of complications that we are not hearing in the media?
Yes, Dr. Young. So I have a lot of 15 to 18-year-olds who have gotten the vaccination, have been very excited about it. Also, I've had situations where the parents did not want to allow the vaccination for their teenagers, but the teenagers were really adamant about it. So I've facilitated some of those conversations. So that's been really good dialogue with the families and the children. The big thing is that children have been presenting with just what people think is their allergies, runny nose, congestion, and they end up testing positive for COVID. I think the biggest thing is that I teach my families is that they need to cocoon their families. So their children that they have that cannot get the vaccine, everyone around them needs to be vaccinated. Everyone around them, including them, need to wash their hands and keep their distance. But the biggest thing is trying to get herd immunity to protect these children until we can get them vaccinated. And the hope for us from the American Academy of Pediatrics is that this will be approved by October, late October, early November for down to age 5. because they are working on dosing increments that might need to happen for ages 5 to 12 may not be able to receive the same dose as the adults are currently receiving. So until then, it is very important that we try to take care of our children and get everyone vaccinated that can get vaccinated. The other thing is that I'm seeing a lot of not following directions or guidelines of quarantining and going back to work early, or continuing to get tested daily until your test's negative, and then you go back to work and you spread COVID to children who cannot protect themselves. So that is a lot of what I am seeing, and because of that, people are testing positive much more frequently in children. We've been seeing in my office at least 2 to 3 positives per day, whereas in the surge last year this time we were only seeing maybe 2 to 3 per week. So I definitely think that everyone needs to, if they have symptoms or their children have some slight symptoms and there's possible exposure, please get them tested, and do not rely just on a rapid test. That's the big community problem that's going on right now. Is I got a rapid test, it was negative, so I'm fine, and so I'm out and about in the community. And lo and behold, had I gotten the PCR that was more specific at that time of my illness, it would have been positive, and then I would have not been unknowingly spreading COVID-19. So that's the big thing in buying these home tests and testing and thinking you're fine versus using reputable, trusted physicians or medical providers, and making sure that you follow up with your personal medical provider if you do receive a positive test.
Yes. Okay. So we need to wrap this up. So we need to go ahead and do these question and answer. Thanks to Dr. Vance, Dr. Hurd, Dr. Black, Dr. Smith for all those words of wisdom. I'm going to open the floor now for questions pertaining to all that you've heard and other things as well. So if anyone has a question, this is your time.
Yes, I do. Dr. Hurd, can you repeat the reputable reps website for me?
Yes, so we'll start with CDC, NIH, that's National Institutes of Health, Mayo Clinic, Cleveland Clinic, Johns Hopkins, Stanford, and Harvard Medical School.
Thank you.
Thank you. Questions? Any more questions?
Yes, I have. I'm sorry.
This is Dr. Smith. I just wanted to add, for the monoclonal antibodies for children ages 12 to 18, there are requirements for that. It's not for every child over 12, from 12 to 18. It is only for children with chronic medical conditions such as diabetes, asthma, or kidney disease, or African-American children, Hispanic children, and then also body mass index over 85th percentile, so overweight children ages 12 to 18. Unfortunately, that's the majority of our population. Secondary to COVID, we are seeing COVID obesity rampantly in pediatrics, and I know in adults as well. So, but the other issue is that you cannot do the 312 MyMD specific referral for pediatric patients. It needs to go through your primary care provider so that they can fill out certain information and provide a H&P, and it be faxed over, and a call-in is required. So just so there's not a delay, because a delay can end up meaning that you're not eligible for the monoclonal antibody infusion, which has been it's very easy to do. I had 2 patients get it this week, and they are feeling a lot better. So we just started this week with pediatrics. So definitely be in touch with your provider if your child ages 12 to 18 test positive and have prolonged symptoms or have these risk factors.
Tanya, did you say just being African American is a criteria?
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right. Any other questions?
Yes, I was wondering. I took my teenagers to go get vaccinated, and they told me they was only allowed to take the Pfizer. Why is they couldn't take the other one, the Mrna?
The Pfizer is the only vaccine that's been approved for ages 12 to 18. The other vaccines are still doing their trials in those age groups and have not had adequate timing or volume of pediatric cases in their trials to be approved for ages 12 to 18. So Pfizer is the only one that's approved for ages 12 to 18.
Okay. Questions?
Yeah, what are your recommendations for assembling in church buildings? Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yeah, we
Yes,
can hear you.
We can.
I'll step out there and tell you my recommendation for any assembly in large numbers or even small numbers of unfamiliar people is just not recommended at this time. You know, seeing pictures yesterday of people standing outside the Albany Theater for a concert. Nobody's wearing a mask. They're all standing back to back in the line. And I just think right now, with this fast and as rampant as this is, any collection or any congregation of any groups of people, whether it be church, the mall, in a house gathering, is just ill-advised at this point in time.
I think in addition to that, just as long as there's mask requirement, social distancing, and washing hands, it can be done with some caution.
Yeah, social distancing would be the most important thing, and being vaccinated would be the second thing in line there. So it'd be very important that you also wear those masks if you're going to be in a building. And it's just going to be a very difficult time when we're still seeing the population of individuals getting the virus right now is increasing in Albany. It is just likely that for every 100 people that come in, at least 10 of them may have the virus. That's just my statistic. So it's just very difficult to know who has the virus. And you know, people love to socialize. And even when you tell them don't socialize, they will. They will go outside of the church and still socialize. So it is very difficult to control populations and to keep them from actually exposing themselves to others.
DeVille, I'd like to add, from the Department of Public Health website, in the last 2 weeks, this is reported cases now. We're not talking about total, we're talking about reported cases of COVID-19. That's people who have gone and gotten tested and the results came back. We've had 704 cases in Dougherty County in the last 2 weeks, 250 in Lee County, 41 in Terrell, and 190 in Worth County. That's our geographic area right there. So that's that's right at 1,000 patients in our area that have tested positive.
Yeah.
Now we know that there's going to be many more who have not tested, who, like Dr. Smith said, are having symptoms that are consistent with allergies. They're having cough. They're having a little bit of runny nose, maybe a little bit of congestion, that are positive that we aren't aware of. So just know that disease burden, to Dr. Black's point, is very high. So I would be extremely cautious in terms of large gatherings. And if you are going to go to church, I would make sure that you are masking. I would recommend the double mask, as they talked about, the surgical mask with the cloth mask on top of that, or an N95 if you have access to that. And then your church building needs to be large enough so there is social distancing. If you cannot, and masks should be required for anyone that's going to be in the sanctuary. If you cannot guarantee that, then I would not, and I repeat, I would not be congregating, because at this point, you're more than likely going to come in contact with someone with COVID in that building, and they don't know that they have it.
Yes, that is absolutely true.
If
And
I
you cannot smell COVID. Well, go ahead.
Now, and Dr. Vance may have covered this in this presentation. It was very thorough, but the original surge, the original COVID-19 research was showing that the average person who was positive would infect 2 other people. The Delta variant is showing that any single person can infect up to 9 other people on average.
Ooh.
So the transmissibility is much higher. We call it the R value, but it's much higher with the current variant. So again, the risk is not any lower. So don't let anybody convince you that this is not as bad as it has been. And for those planning on vacationing, Florida is one of the states that is showing a higher number of cases and a higher number of deaths than the initial outbreak. So, and I think we talked about over 620,000 in the US, over 4.25 million worldwide people that we know of have died from coronavirus. So this is still ongoing.
Yes. Any other questions?
Ms. Doctors, I am so worried about my 13-year-old daughter. She's in middle school, and she says that her masks are uncomfortable. And I want her to wear it all day. Someone recommended to me that she takes it off maybe toward the middle of the day and change and put on another one. And they're not, I don't think they're social distancing like we should want them to do because they're in school. And so what would be your recommendations for that type of worry?
Ms. Johnson,
So
I'm not a,
making sure
I'm gonna let you answer because you're the pediatrician, but I just want to say, Ms. Johnson, first of all, make sure your child has a vaccine if you haven't already. And that will give you some reassurance there.
Mm-hmm.
But like Dr. Hurd mentioned, you can double mask, wear a surgical mask and a cloth mask on top. The CDC studies found that actually approximates an N95 mask. It's about 95% effective in blocking virus transmission. When we wear one single mask, we're really just protecting other people from us, our respiratory, droplets. But when you wear two masks or you're wearing an N95 mask, you're actually protecting yourself and other people. So if she's got to be at school, have her wear two masks or get an N95 mask. And then the third thing would be maybe you just need to consider virtual. But I'll let Dr. Smith, she needs to give the definitive answer as a pediatrician.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ed. The biggest thing with that is making sure I am recommending that any of my high-risk children, including being vaccinated, they should wear double mask or comparable N95 mask. There are actually two African-American pediatricians who have a company called Little Lives PPE, LittleLives PPE.com. They sell equivalent KN95 pediatric size mask and also 5-ply surgical mask. So they have been very good as far as sizing and protectiveness. But the biggest thing is if they're going to be somewhere like in Lee County where everyone's not wearing a mask, understand that just a regular cloth mask is not going to protect your child. It's only going to protect those other children from your child. So you want to make sure your children are protected. They need to have on either double mask or a N95 equivalent.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I find that that surgical mask followed by the cloth mask is a lot more comfortable. The cloth mask tends to just put a lot of pressure on your nose and mouth, and you're not able to really speak like you want to. But that surgical mask followed by the cloth mask actually is more comfortable.
There are also some commercially available, I don't know what to call them, but they're frames, plastic frames that kind of push the mask away from the face, but maintain the seal that is placed inside of a cloth or surgical mask. And people have found it to be a little more comfortable, but we don't want them to get so comfortable that the mask is pulled away and loses its effectiveness. In order for the mask to be effective, especially with the surgical mask and the cloth mask as well, they need to have a tight fit, as tight a fit around the mouth and nose as you can.
Yes, I know we've all seen individuals wear the mask over their mouth with the nose hanging out.
Right.
You want to do something to them. You want to tell them, but they they seem so comfortable.
And also make sure that nasal bridge is bent accordingly to fit your child's nose. So a lot of people are having their children wear surgical masks, but they are not conformed to the nose. And so therefore it's not giving them the full protection. So you want to make sure that they are fitted properly and they understand that their nose and mouth both need to be covered and they should not be able to feel the air coming in from the mask. If they do, then it is not correctly fitted. Ooh. And also we need to wash those cloth masks regularly and discard those surgical masks in a timely fashion, not wearing the same surgical mask all week or, So that's very important because some people are wearing the same mask till they're soiled, and once the point it's soiled, it's not effective.
Yes.
Okay, any other questions?
Yes, I have a question. Okay, does the mRNA COVID vaccine have a side effect that causes myocarditis?
This is Dr. Vance. I believe there were some cases of, specifically in children, where myocarditis happened. Dr. Smith, you can probably speak to that better. But in terms of the most common side effects, that's not one of them. It's a pretty rare
And it was with the Johnson vaccine, I believe.
No, it was with the mRNA vaccines. It was about 1,100 young men, usually between the ages of 18 to 22, that was affected. And myocarditis is inflammation of the heart, but it was easily treated with NSAIDs, nonsteroidals like ibuprofen or prednisone, and they were not life-threatening, and no one died from that. So again, although that is a possible side effect, it is really not a reason not to get the vaccine, because it was in a small subset of patients. And once it was diagnosed, it was easily treated and no one died from that. And I'm sorry, Tanya, I jumped in there.
Oh, that's okay. You're fine. And then the children ages 12 to 18, which is why the study seems to took a little bit longer. And also the 5 to 12-year-old study is taking longer because of the increased incidence in myocarditis, mostly in males. And it's usually after the second vaccine of the mRNA vaccine. However, the myocarditis is it's the short-lived myocarditis versus myocarditis, which is also seen in all viral illnesses, including COVID-19. And so COVID-19 illness associated myocarditis, those individuals are having heart symptoms and cardiac abnormalities for up to 6 months. And when it's after the vaccine, it's been 4 to 6 weeks. So definitely a big difference. And there's a 10-fold increase in the number of cases of myocarditis in people who have the actual COVID-19 illness versus those that receive the mRNA COVID vaccine. So 2 big points is it lasts longer if you get the illness, and it's curable, and it's shorter term if you get the vaccine. So, and less cases. So very important to just go ahead and push through and get the vaccine, but just be very cautious if your son has chest pain or feels like his heart is racing or shortness of breath after his vaccine. It's very important that you seek medical advice and medical help.
All right, Dr. Ferguson, are you there? Would you like to say any words? I think she's driving. Okay. Any other questions?
Dr. Young, I just wanted to give a personal account. I actually had COVID, like probably many of you on the Zoom have had. I had it earlier this month. And this is after 1.5 years of really being diligent about social distancing, wearing my mask, washing hands, basically being a social hermit. And unfortunately, when June came around and our cases were down to about 10,000, I had been vaccinated. I knew 50% of us had been vaccinated and across the nation. I felt comfortable enough to be a little more social, to go out to dinners or restaurants, of course, staying, spread out from other people, trying to sit outside when that was an option. But at some point in time, probably late July, early August, I was exposed somewhere. And, that also correlated with the Delta variant coming into this nation. And I was miserable. I tested positive August 4th. I was miserable for a couple of weeks. And I had my vaccines. I had a December 18th, like I said, and January 13th. But, I'm not mad at my vaccines. I'm still proud to have had the vaccines. I still have complete faith and understanding of the vaccines because they performed as advertised. I did not die. I did not end up in the hospital. And that's what those vaccines are about. I availed myself of everything science had to offer. I called my personal doctor who's on this panel, Dr. Hurd. I said, Hurd, I had a big cough just now. Actually, I texted him, but I said, I just had a deep cough, ordered that monoclonal antibody. Next day, I was in a chair at Phoebe North getting the monoclonal antibody. And by the way, if you didn't remember, our last occupant of the White House received that monoclonal antibody. Everybody heard about it as called Regeneron. I received the very exact same combination of monoclonal antibodies. It's actually 2. And I did feel a little bit better the next day. But like I said, the most important thing is I did not end up in the hospital. I did not die. And remind your people who have not had a vaccine that is the whole reason to get the vaccine. My vaccine immunity may have waned a little bit because I got it so early. I'm going to get my booster as soon as I can. But that is why you should get that vaccine, because I could easily have turned the other way and been laying under Dr. Black in the ER and him having to either put me on a oxygen machine or put a tube down my throat. And fortunately, I did not have to do that. Last weekend, I was back in the hospital seeing patients. So I'm thankful for that. And I know y'all are Christian minded, and I praise God and thank God for that.
Right. Well, it's most important thing is there is no credible reason not to get the vaccine. And just want to encourage everyone to get it if they're eligible, 12 and older. And this is definitely, we have more than enough available. We have so much available that the United States has been exporting vaccine. So we really need to encourage our family and friends to please take the vaccine. And I see here that Church of Christ, Gaines Street also has a mobile van that's coming through that's going to be vaccinating this Sunday. Is that right?
No, sir, September.
Oh, it's September. Okay. Oh, September. September the 28th.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And the time is going to be announced. So we see that Mount Zion is going to do it this Sunday. And then we will have a Church of Christ on September 28th. So Dr. Hurd, is there a website where people can go to find out where these mobile vans will be in terms of administering the vaccine?
Dr. Young, unfortunately, there is not a website that they can go to, but you can always call the 312-MyMD to see if there is going to be somewhere where it's going to be. A lot of times when we're taking out our mobile units, it's because different organizations have called us and asked us to come out. So there isn't necessarily a website for that, but you can always call 312-MyMD to see if the mobile units will be out.
Okay, 312-MyMD.
And Dr. Young, it's going to be September the 26th.
September 26th. Okay. And I think the more availability we have, the better. But there are some people that's unshakable, and you cannot convince them. You cannot talk them out of their fear. But you know, I think now that we have an authorized vaccine through Pfizer, and hopefully someday very soon with Mrna through the FDA, this may help them make that decision. Some are doing their own research, as they say, but there is, you know, the research has already been done, and it's showing that we are much further ahead by taking the vaccine with greater protection. So it's less likely to die as a result of getting COVID if you've had the vaccine. So it's a very important thing that we do for our family and friends to encourage them to take this vaccine. And it is not the Tuskegee experiment all over. So any other questions? If not, we'll adjourn and try to do this wonderful event again. Yes.
Will the shield help?
Thank you.
In any way?
Say it again.
Will the shield help to protect us from the virus? Wearing the one mask and the face shield.
Oh, the face shield.
Yes, sir.
Yes, I mean, the face shield is just another piece of that mask operation, but it, you know, it's not as effective as wearing the mask, because if you just wearing the face shield by itself, you still can get virus underneath the face shield. So I don't think it adds too much more protection than what the actual mask, double masking can add. So anybody else have any ring on that?
Yeah, DeVal, yes. The face shield is more so to protect the eyes from droplets that could come in. There were some reports early on that if you got droplets directly onto your mucous membranes, that it could potentially cause COVID infection. And so that's one of the reasons why we wear a mask or we wear goggles when we're at work. But in terms of protecting the respiratory component of this, you need to be masked and double masked. And like someone said earlier, one cloth mask is not going to do it. You need to have a surgical mask plus a cloth mask on top of that, or you need to get an N95 mask to be safe.
Right, the cloth mask has been pointed out.
Question.
Go ahead.
Question number 2. if you had the maternal vaccination, do we need to get the same thing for booster?
Yes, yes, ma'am.
It's been recommended, but they, CDC did make that that statement that if you cannot get the Pfizer because you had the Pfizer and the Moderna is the only thing that's available, that you could do that, but they prefer that you get the same vaccine that you got before.
Thank you.
I have a question about isolating. I had COVID, then I had the vaccine, and now I have COVID again. How long is it recommended that I isolate this second time?
I see Dr. Black holding up all 10 fingers. Is that what you meant, Dr. Black, 10 days?
10 days.
At least 10 days. But really don't go back to work or go back out in the public until you've not had a fever or symptoms for 3 days at least, even if it's longer than 10 days. So if you're day 11 and you're still having a fever, don't just go back to work. Don't just go back in the public. Wait another, several days until you're not having a fever, you're not having cough, you're not having shortness of breath. Those are indications that you're still contagious, basically.
And the 10 days applies to a positive test without symptoms, because you don't know where you are in that cycle of viral replication. Are you in the front end of it or the back end of it? So if you're having no symptoms in a positive test, in order to be safe, you need to quarantine or isolate actually for 10 days.
Okay, thank you.
All right, any other questions? Well,
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I have a question, sir.
Okay.
Okay, if we have been vaccinated, let's say we have like little side effects, not side effects, but we start having like allergy issue. When do y'all suggest that we should be tested? We should just quarantine, or should we take some for allergy? Should we, what's y'all suggestion on that?
The recommendation, if you think that you may have been exposed, you should wait at least 5 days before getting tested. As Dr. Black just mentioned, you could be very early on in the viral replication process. And so you could potentially test negative even though you actually have the virus inside of you. So we generally want to wait about 5 days to make sure that there's enough viral replication so that it will show up on the test. So yes, we recommend if you're having symptoms and you think you've been exposed, wait at least 5 days to be tested.
So during those 5 days that you're waiting, even though you've been exposed, should you quarantine?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, if you think there's been a potential exposure, you need to quarantine yourself. Exactly.
Right. Any other questions? Okay, well, this is not the end. This is the beginning. Yes, ma'am.
How can I tell whether I have the Delta or the regular virus?
That testing, excuse me, that testing is not done locally. The CDC receives a random sampling from various places around the state and around the country to try to determine the prevalence of the Delta variant. But I would also, from a clinical standpoint, it doesn't matter what variant that you have, which they're going to treat it no matter what it is. There is no different treatment for the Delta variant versus any other variant. Secondly, the Delta variant is thought to be the predominant variant across the country, encompassing more than 95, 97% of the cases. But knowing which one you have doesn't change how we treat you. So I know that everybody's concerned about it, but we won't know locally which type you have, but we're going to treat you appropriately, irrespective of the type that you may have.
Thank you. Now, question number 2. How can you determine a carrier that don't have the symptoms?
Very good question. And the answer is you cannot. So everybody has COVID. I think if you take that approach, because nobody has a scarlet C pasted to the top of their head, you cannot tell whether your close friends, your families, your loved ones, or some random stranger is an asymptomatic carrier. So the worst thing to me, worse than anything else, is a sneeze and unelevated, because I'm certain that person must have COVID. But you have to take the approach and the standpoint that everybody is potentially a carrier. There's no way to identify them. You also cannot identify who has been vaccinated. So just assume that everybody is a carrier and that no one has been vaccinated. So you must take steps to protect yourself and your loved ones.
And I'll just add to that, you definitely can't tell by looking at somebody. The only way to know is to get a test, a screening test. So if you're curious, if you're worried, if you're on an elevator, somebody sneezed, you can go and get a free screening test at the Department of Public Health testing site they just set up behind Phoebe North. I think it's on 13th Avenue. It's no charge. It's not a rapid test, so you're not going to get the result right then and there. They're going to send it off to a bigger lab, like Dr. Black said, and you'll get your results in a few days. And they'll, I think they have a system set up to email or text you your results. But that's a way to screen. So, early on in the pandemic, that's really what we should have been doing a lot more of was, testing the entire public to see who's positive and then isolating those people, doing contact tracing to find out, who has been exposed to this person who's positive, and then isolate everybody potentially who had been exposed to them. Right now, the virus is so rampant, it's so everywhere, it's omnipresent that, it's hard to do contact tracing because everybody's been exposed to everybody potentially. But if you're just curious or you think you're exposed, you're worried, I would suggest you go to that DPH, Department of Public Health site behind Phoebe North.
Okay, thank you for that information. And there's morsels of information that pops up every once in a while. You read about it and you hear about it, but I wish it was a way in which it was all just available to the public by just at one site. So you'll know exactly where these things are happening and what time they're happening. And that makes it kind of difficult to get people to where they need to go to. I hadn't heard of that site on 13th Avenue behind Phoebe North. So that's important information for even physicians. And it's definitely something that we all need to know about.
Yeah, it was just set up, I think, this past Saturday, so it's new.
Okay. All right. Any other questions?
Yes, I have a question. I have a 12-year-old that has a seizure disorder, and I was just checking what would be the recommendations for him getting a vaccine.
He should.
Okay.
He, in terms of being at somewhat of a higher risk, having certain neurologic conditions is considered a higher risk population. So yes, him getting the vaccine would ultimately, play a part in helping prevent him from getting a serious illness.
Yeah, if he's already being treated for his seizure disorder and this is under control, he should not have any greater risk than anyone else.
There are very few, and I'm only leaving some allowance for things that I may be unaware of, but I can off the top of my head think of any medical condition that is other than an allergy to the vaccine itself. I cannot think of a medical condition that I would say I would just tell someone to give pause and not get the vaccine. I think anybody with a pre-existing medical conditions at higher risk, and all those people with pre-existing medical conditions, if they get COVID, don't fare as well. So there's not a condition I think that comes to mind, and I certainly stand to be corrected by the guys on here who are much smarter than I am, but there's no medical condition that comes to mind that says that you should not get it.
That's correct, Dr. Black. That was actually in the presentation that the only single contraindication to getting a vaccine is having an allergy to the COVID vaccine previously. So if you got one dose and you had some type of allergic reaction or you had a severe one, you're going to need to discuss with your doctor as to whether or not you should get a second dose, or if you had a severe allergic reaction, just don't get the second dose. And you'll have to just, combat COVID with social distancing and mask wearing. But the only absolute contraindication to the only reason to not get the COVID vaccine is having had an allergic reaction to the COVID vaccine. So Even people who have multiple drug allergies, you know, you're allergic to penicillin and everything else under the sun, or every time you get a flu shot, you get an allergic reaction, you can still get a COVID vaccine. Now, the recommendation is that we as doctors should observe you longer than the average patient. You know, we observe everybody for 15 minutes after the vaccine. But if you have a history of allergic reactions to other things, we observe you longer for 30 minutes. So be prepared to wait a little longer. But other than that, COVID affects everybody, seizures, heart attacks, you know, whether you had diabetes, anything else, you should get a COVID vaccine.
Okay. Any other questions? All right. Well, let us all be diligent in our, yes.
How is contact tracing done?
Well, I assume it is something through the public health department where an individual is identified as being positive and then getting all of the contacts that individual may have had. I'm not sure if we have the manpower to do the contact tracing, and I'm not sure even if it's occurring in Dougherty County.
Thank you.
Yeah, it was occurring originally in the pandemic, but I think the pandemic became so overwhelming for the Department of Public Health here. But it's essentially done through the Department of Public Health. They hire people specifically to do contact tracing. They give them training on it, on what questions to ask, you know, how to follow up, how often to follow up. But like Dr. Young said, the pandemic is just so overwhelming. It's basically ineffective at this point. You just assume you've been exposed to COVID, or anybody that comes in your vicinity has COVID. Like Dr. Black said, just assume they have COVID, especially if they're sneezing with you on the elevator.
Okay, questions. We've had a wonderful time today, and I think a lot of information has been imparted. Some questions have been given, and I think you should still have the ability to get those questions out. And if more questions come up, Ms. Johnson can actually gather them and we can present it to the panel and let them answer those questions for you. So never stop asking questions. And I think the more you know, the more likely you'll be able to impart to your loved ones and friends, and not have all these different types of social media type information out there. So we just need facts, and we need to know exactly what we're dealing with. Unfortunately, we don't have all the information because this is an ongoing problem, and it's going to take a while before we have every answer to every question. But we're learning more and more as time goes. And we know for sure that the vaccine can benefit us in dealing with this. Just as we do not see smallpox anymore, we don't see polio, we don't see children don't get measles, mumps, rubella. It seems that we've done a great job with vaccines over the years. So the more of us that get vaccinated, the less likely we'll have individuals developing this vaccine and dying from it. So get the word out, vaccinate. That is the answer. So if there are no other questions, we'll adjourn. Ms. Johnson, do you have any other words or anything to say? All right. Anyone else from Church of Christ who has any words?
This is Carolyn Brown. I want to thank all of the people on the panel, these distinguished doctors, for giving us the information that we've acquired today. And we will continue to try and get the information out to get our population vaccinated so that we can be a healthier group of people. And I want to thank everybody for attending.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Brown. All right, well, that concludes our presentation and questions. So everyone have a wonderful Saturday and be safe.
You too.
All right, bye-bye.